Hello students, welcome back. So let us start with our next and a very interesting chapter, the most famous man alive. So Albert Einstein was an outstanding physician and an exceptional human being. The writer gives us a fascinating glimpse of Einstein's personality in an interesting meeting with a young boy called Theo. So there are two characters. One is Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of all times, and the second character of this story is Theo, a little young boy. If you are lucky, something special will happen to you in your life that you will never forget. So now the narrator is saying, if you are ever lucky in your whole entire life, something special will happen with you in your life which you will never forget. Something so special, you know, it could have happened only to you. For me, it was the day I rescued Albert Einstein's compass. So now the narrator is saying that I had a lucky day, and the lucky day was that I rescued Albert Einstein's compass. It was Sunday's morning. As I came downstairs, I heard someone playing the violin. So now the narrator is saying it was a Sunday morning, and when I came down from my room and when I came downstairs, I heard someone playing piano. Repeat, I heard someone playing violin. The living room doors were slightly ajar. So what do we mean by ajar, students? That the living room doors were little tight to open. My mother and father were waiting for me. They all were waiting for the author or the narrator in the dining room. My father said to me, "Do you remember, Theo, about 5 years ago, you were 7 years old. You met our dear friend, her Professor Einstein." So now narrator's father is saying that, do you remember, Theo, when you were 7 years old, you met her Professor Einstein. I told you then that he was the most famous man alive. Yes, I do, Papa. So now the narrator is saying that yes, I remember that we both met Professor Einstein when I was 7 years old. And I asked you why he was the most famous man alive. And you said because he is the great physician who had made important discoveries. So now the narrator is saying that I remember that I met Professor Einstein when I was 7 years old, and you told me that he was the greatest physician of all time and he was the most famous man alive. I looked at my father. Is he here, Papa? I looked at my father. So now the narrator is saying, is he here, Papa? Is Einstein here to meet me again? My father nodded, which means the narrator father said, yes, Einstein is here to meet you, to see you again. Yes, he is here. He is playing violin. Suddenly the doors of the living room flew open and a deep voice said with a chuckle. What do we mean by chuckle here, students? It means a little laughter. The last time I was here, your father assured you that I did not bite. And as your father and I have been close friends for many years, he knows that I still do not bite. And he chuckled even louder. So now Albert Einstein made a little joke that the last time I was here, your father told me that I did not bite, and till now I don't bite. So you can be certain that I am a safe person to meet. I looked up. There was a thick black mustache and a large head with grey black hair brushing out all around. So the narrator is describing the character of how Albert Einstein actually looked. He looked very old and the hair were brushing all over. There were the eyes, dark and merry. What do we mean by merry, students? The eyes were happy. So Albert Einstein was a person who was always happy and cheerful. He hadn't changed, although he seemed much less formidable than he did 5 years ago. So now he is little older than he used to be 5 years ago, perhaps because I was older now. Herr Einstein laid his violin on the side of the piano. Now, young man, let us get immediately to business. So now Albert Einstein is talking to the narrator, Theo, and saying that now, young man, let us get immediately to business. Your parents told me that you have a sailboat. I too have loved sailing all my life. Will you take me out in your boat? It is the most beautiful thing. So now Mr. Albert Einstein is telling Theo that please let us go sailing, and I loved sailing and I have heard from your parents that you have a sailboat. So let us both go for sailing, and it is a very beautiful day. I looked at my parents. Take the most famous man alive sailing in my sailboat. So now the narrator is looking shockingly at his parents that I looked at my parents take the most famous man alive sailing in my sailboat. So now the narrator is shocked and he is thinking to himself and looked at his parents that should I take the most famous man alive sailing in my sailboat? My necks and cheeks felt hot. So he was very shocked, very nervous that should I take the most famous man with me to my sailboat? My mother looked very pleased. So the narrator's mother is very pleased, is very happy. Our guest is an excellent sailor, and so are you. It would be lovely for two of you to go out on the lake. It will be something you will always remember. So now narrator's mother, Theo's mother, is telling him that please take Albert Einstein with you and it would be very lovely experience. So you both should go. And the most famous man alive put his hand on my shoulder. Then let us be off. So now Albert Einstein is telling Theo that should we both go, let us go. Please young man, take me to your boat. We walked down the hill from the house towards a line of giant blue spurs that edged the lake. Is there always so much bird song here, Theo? The new friend asked. So Albert Einstein is asking Theo that is there always so much birds here? It is wonderful to have the air filled with such music. So Albert Einstein is enjoying the music, the birds and the chirping. So there was another thing we have in common. So now Theo is thinking that even Albert Einstein likes bird watching and listening to birds chirping, and we both have another thing in common. I was delighted that he was interested in birds. I was a keen bird watcher, and my parents had given me a very fine pair of binoculars on my last birthday. So even the narrator was a big fan of watching birds, and Albert Einstein and the narrator had another thing in common, which was bird watching. It's spring, I said, and the birds are laying their eggs in the nest they have built in blue spurs. They are happy. So now the narrator is telling Albert Einstein that it's spring and the birds are laying eggs, so that's why they are happy, they are chirping, and it is amazing moment for both of us to watch. They are happy. Do you have birds where you live? So now the narrator is asking, do you have birds where you live? No, not now. So Albert Einstein is saying that no, not now. I don't have many birds the place I live. He smiled rather sadly, I thought. Not now, I live in the city. So Albert Einstein is telling Theo that now I live in cities where I don't find many birds. But when I was a boy, I went sailing on a lake. Near my house, there were birds everywhere. Just then, our piers came into view. We could see my bright green boat with its jaunty green and white stripe and white striped sail rocking gently on the water. what have you named your boat? So now Albert Einstein is asking Theo that what have you named your boat? Tell me. Fleet Felix, I answered proudly. Her Professor Einstein approved. I like that, or perhaps even Felix the Fleet. So they both are joking, and now the narrator said that this is the name of my boat. We put on the orange life jacket I kept in a giant tin drum by the end of the piers. So they both put on a orange life jacket which the narrator has put in a tin drum. Then I stepped in the boat. My crew of one untied the rope, coiled it up and came aboard. He took over the tiller and I held the sheet. So they both are untying the boat and they both are ready for sail. We were off. There was a easy breeze. We followed the shoreline. The clouds were like pink cotton puffs and the sky was as blue as my mother's eyes. So now the narrator is telling the sky was as blue as my mother's eyes. I decided that this was the perfect time to ask my question. So now the narrator wants to ask a question to Mr. Albert Einstein. He is very curious. He wants to ask this question. I had been thinking about it ever since I walked in the living room. I took a deep breath. So now the narrator is taking a deep breath because he is very nervous. And he said, yes, asked Herr Professor Einstein. Of course, he would know I was going to ask a question. He was the most famous man alive. I asked my question slowly. So now the narrator is asking the question. So what is this question, students? Let's see. Why did you want to become a physician? So now the narrator is asking Mr. Albert Einstein, why did you want to become a physician? Tell me about it. Tell me about it. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he put his hand in his pocket. So Mr. Albert Einstein didn't answer the narrator's question. Instead, he put his hand inside the pocket. It has fallen through a hole in the living. And he threw back his great head and laughed and laughed. So Mr. Albert Einstein said that something has fallen from my pocket and there was a hole in my pocket and something fell from there. What? The greatest man alive had a hole in his pocket. So now the narrator is thinking to himself that the most famous man alive had a hole in his pocket. It is so weird, right? I was glad it made him laugh, but I didn't quite understand. So now the narrator is confused. The narrator is unable to understand that what Mr. Albert Einstein wants to tell him. Excuse me, Herr Professor, but what has fallen through a hole in your pocket? I asked politely. So now the narrator is asking Albert Einstein that what has fallen through a hole which was there in your pocket? Tell me about it. The answer to your question. So Mr. Albert Einstein is telling narrator in a very quirky and in a very humorous manner that it was the answer of your question which has fallen from my pocket, and there was a hole in my pocket and your answer has fallen from my pocket. Repeat. That is what has fallen through the hole. Heavens, I think it is somewhere under the pocket now. 1 minute, I must tear the lining. A little more there now. I shall fish it out, only it wouldn't be a fish but. So now Albert Einstein, he is very humorous and he is joking about the whole situation that your answer has fallen from my pocket. I don't even know the answer of your question. By the time I was laughing, so even narrator started laughing. He drew out his hand. Between his fingers was a compass. I'll tell you a story, said my friend softly. So who is this friend? Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein said that I'll tell you a story. I looked up at the sky. 2 red-tailed hawks were riding the warm air currents, the thermals. Fleet Felix what is Fleet Felix here, students? The boat of the narrator, the sailboat, was catching the breeze perfectly. So they both were sailing and enjoying the time. They both were laughing cheerfully. When I was 5 years old, I was quite ill. I had to stay in the bed for many days. My father gave me this compass. So now Albert Einstein is narrating a story that this compass was given to me by my father when I was very ill at a very young age. He peers at me. You know what a compass is for? Of course, I nodded. So this brings us to the end of the chapter, students. I hope you all enjoyed this very interesting lesson. Thank you.